Joining us now on this, and then we're going to be pivoting to China, our good friend Stephen Yates, and you can find him at YatesComms on X, senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute and chair of the China Policy Initiative. So, Stephen, always good to see you. This Eclipse Mania Monday. This I really reject that framing that the left keeps putting up, that it's Israel that's rejected any kind of offer of hostage release or any kind of agreement, because that's not a serious offer coming from Hamas. Release all these terrorists and maybe we'll give you some of the hostages back.
Yeah, well, there is an internationalized form of Trump derangement syndrome, and it basically is if your dominant frame is you really hate a particular political leader, and no matter what, anything he says or does is not enough, it's not good, it's inherently evil. A lot of these people that are covering this think that about Benjamin Netanyahu, and they might have chapter and verse that explains why they've arrived at this august conclusion. But I don't know how any reasonable person can look at Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist organization, murdering, killing, raping, all the things we know they did. It's on video, and people need to refresh their memories of what this actually was, has kept hostages to this date. And whether Netanyahu would or wouldn't make a deal, our president of the United States doesn't even mention the names of the remaining American hostages. I mean, back in the late 1970s into the 1980 election cycle, we had a news media that put some fire on the Carter administration by giving a calendar of days of how many days our hostages had been held by the Iranians. Why isn't there a similar daily reminder that these poor souls remain unaccounted for by our president? And until that's taken care of, what is this deal making we're talking of? And if there are innocent civilians that are getting hurt, I feel badly for them, but I did not allow terrorists to take root in my neighborhood, to dig tunnels under my hospitals, schools, and other important infrastructure. And so I think Americans are pretty frustrated by all of this manipulation and misinformation. And really, we got hit. Israel wasn't the only one getting hit. And shouldn't we want to eliminate the terrorist organization that did it within every reasonable means available to us?
I think that's a great point. I mean, and with this, also Nancy Pelosi now with a number of other Democrats sending a letter saying, no, we don't agree to the arms package, no more arms packages for Israel, essentially cutting them off from being able to obtain new weapons. That's a pretty big deal to the only ally that we have in that area. And that's like this is one of three insane things that the administration has done just within the past week. Your quick thought on that?
Well, number one, I don't know how we're going to have any allies in the world if we continue to treat allies like this. I was lectured to incessantly about the value of alliances and the need to unequivocally and without any limits support Ukraine, actually not a treaty ally of the United States against Russia, because it would send a signal to Taiwan and China that the U.S. will stand by its allies. Well, here's an example of a treaty ally being attacked by a terrorist organization, and now the United States is threatening not to provide material support to that ally in a time of war and crisis. How would that reassure Japan, Taiwan, or anyone in the South China Sea that the United States' big galaxy brains from the Ivy Leagues aren't going to come up with some condition for them to have a preemptive retreat in the face of PRC aggression? This is actually kind of nonsensical and toxic. They've left their minds behind, and it's only driven by politics, either the electoral college politics or the ideology of they just hate Netanyahu so much, almost as much as they hate Trump, and so this has to be bad.
Oh, that's a good point. Talking with our friend Stephen Yates, you can find him on X at YatesComms. The signal sending to allies, you mentioned Taiwan. Well, then, of course, this was one of the three in the hat trick that the administration pulled last week. You had John Kirby go out and say that the United States doesn't recognize Taiwan's independence, doesn't recognize it. Is that a significant about face on that the whole approach that we had, the vague policy that we had towards Taiwan previously?
Well, sadly, it isn't really a change of policy. We've had a lot of dough-brained leaders spout this kind of policy for a very long time. It's one way to make a communist very, very happy to see you willfully say something you know is not true because you're afraid they're going to do something bad. That basically is an admission of dominance over you, and that's what that policy is. The People's Republic of China has never controlled Taiwan, period.
Right.
Since the founding of the Communist Party of China through the Civil War and to this day, they have never controlled Taiwan. And so when people talk about the status quo is a Taiwan that lives independent of the People's Republic of China. And so I don't know why Kirby or anyone else has to dance around this. The status quo is independence. China wants to make Taiwan completely dependent on the People's Republic. That's what all of this is about. And since when do you sell arms to someone
Yeah.
that is, not independent of the threat that they're trying to fight? I mean, it just doesn't add up at a basic level. I'm just of the view that we're not pushing this. It's the CCP that's pushing all this stuff. And if we aim to resist it, we should strengthen the resistors without our having to commit what we would do one way or the other. That seems to be too complex for a lot of these galaxy brains, but it's where we got to go.
Yeah, because I've never heard an administration actually say that before. And I know we've talked about this, really under Democrat and Republican administrations, they've always had that strategic ambiguity where they've never said it. I think it was Trump that got in trouble. Didn't he call their leader after they had an election and then there was some drama
Their leader
over
called
that?
to congratulate him on getting
Yes.
elected. What
Yes.
a profound and destabilizing behavior.
Oh, exactly. Just so shocking. But he never actually said, he never went out and said, oh, we recognize their independence. And he did call and congratulate, the leader on winning, the latest election. This Kirby saying we don't recognize their independence. My first thought, and this is as conspiracy theorist as I get, my first thought was, okay, what spooked them? Why this? Why the need for that?
Well, there are a lot of things that spook them that don't necessarily spook the normals of our society. Number one, they actually believe the climate crisis is an existential threat and that we're all doomed unless we get cooperation from China and unless we get a whole bunch of stuff imported from China and somehow working with the world's largest, most prolific polluter is going to save the planet. I can't square that. But for them, that's a massive, massive priority. And so they don't want to unnerve that channel of dialogue. They also just had Secretary Yellen go, and she's going to talk about how to manage the economic relationship. I'm of the view, I don't know that you can have a normal economic relationship with a country that poisons you with COVID and fentanyl, steals everything from semiconductors to a car gigapress, and is involved in undermining the war you said was righteous and helping defend Ukraine. They're deeply embedded in helping Russia against Ukraine. So I don't see where they go with this, but that's what they're doing. They're repeating the mantras of the past to try to keep the program of the past going uninterrupted. But Xi Jinping is interrupting that.
Yeah. And you mentioned Janet Yellen. Can we play audio soundbite too really quickly? This was her talking about this. Everyone's using Gwyneth Paltrow's words, decoupling from China. Listen to this.
During conversations this week, I underscored again that the United States does not seek to decouple from China. Our two economies are deeply integrated, and a wholesale separation would be disastrous for both of our economies.
To cut into her, it seems like, Stephen, that there's so much effort being made these past several days to make assurances to China for some reason. And I just what am I missing? What happened? Why all of a sudden this huge need to pat them on the back and do the hand holding and act like, no, we still support all the stuff that you're doing. I mean, we sit here and we lecture about human rights as it relates to 7 AIDS workers over the 1,600 that were killed by Hamas, but we say nothing about the imprisonment going on in northwestern China. What in the world?
Or the political prisoners in Hong Kong, the threat to
Jimmy
Taiwan,
Lai.
and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, she said nothing really about the American platforms that are denied access to China. China's the one that's been into the decoupling thing. I don't ever remember signing on to a marriage, much less going steady with the Communist Party of China. So to me, I mean, decoupling might not match because I never thought we were a couple. But I think that we should be becoming less dependent. She
Right.
tried to say as much, that that we don't want to be too dependent on them, and they're trying to take over the market. I think that's probably the most truth she spoke in the entire exchange. But nothing she's saying or doing is making us less dependent or helping us take more control over the markets that we should be doing, not by manipulation, but by competing. We need to unleash American energy. We need to deregulate our economy. We need to do a better job of presenting better options to Americans and our allies. And if we do those things, we can contain the malign influences of the CCP, and we can have sort of a doe-eyed deer go to China and say, oh, we just want to get along. But until we do those things, this is kind of double danger. She's giving them the pablum of the past and not really changing any policy to make us less dependent and less at risk. So decoupling is the word they want to hit. Maybe it's not the right word, but they're definitely not minimizing or lessening our risk. And that supposedly was their genius alternative, de-risking.
Last quick question, talking with our friend Stephen Yates. Since everything happened after you were on last week, all of this a flood of this foreign policy, Ukraine and NATO. You had Blinken go out and say, well, yeah, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. They didn't give a timeline for it. Why? Why in the world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I was kind of surprised by that. I might be the only one that was surprised, but I was kind of surprised by that. I also thought since the grown-ups were back, we would consult with our allies. I don't think every NATO member had been consulted about this declaration by the United States. That was what I thought used to be called unilateralism.
Yeah.
And by the way, it has been an openly discussed red line for Russia from the beginning of this escalation. And I don't believe in kind of giving in to an adversary's red lines, but you do need to be deliberate about if we're going to cross it. Am I really prepared to belly up for the risk and the response? And I don't think that the American people feel like that. And frankly, I'd be surprised if the rest of Europe had already bought into that idea. So I thought it was an outlier. It was surprising and basically pretty hypocritical given the general foreign policy lectures we've been served for the last 3 years.
Yeah, completely agree. Stephen Yates at Yates Comms, always a pleasure, my friend. Happy Eclipse Mania Monday. I'm not really excited about it. It's like a celestial event. I feel like, I'm the odd man out because I'm like, it's okay. It's, the moon going in front of the sun. Woo! I don't know.
Yeah, I'm for the light.
See,
Just
there
give me
you
the
go.
light.
There you go. We're killjoys together. Stephen Yates at Yates Comms, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you. Good to see you. Have a great week.
Thank you, Dana. Take care.